All right, so I want to take you guys through the learning and memory exam. I want to make sure that you understand anything that you missed on the exam, and then also hope that you'll use this feedback to help you prepare for the final exam at the end of the semester. As always with these exam reviews, I want to encourage you to go ahead and just open up your exam. So you may need to pause the video, load up your exam so that you can look at the questions as I go through this. And then hopefully, um, if you've missed anything as I go through this, you'll understand why you missed it. But if you don't, please get a hold of me. So reach out, send me an email or call my office so that you and I can talk and discuss your individual exam. So I'm just going to go through each of the questions. The three stages of memory are sensory, short-term, and long-term. Sensory memory, and it includes iconic and echoic memory. It's also very brief, less than 3 seconds, so that would be all of the above. The average adult can hold 7 plus or minus 2 items in short-term memory. A strategy for increasing the capacity of short-term memory in which items are grouped together into meaningful units is called chunking. The tendency of people to recall items at the end of a list is known as, and sometimes students struggle when I ask them to use a skill um, that we use that we call hierarchical classification, and where you kind of have to recognize that there are higher order categories that include things that are in lower categories. So here, I've described a serial position effect, so that's true. There are two of them that we discussed in the lecture called the primacy effect and recency effect. And the recency effect is remembering things at the end of the list. So that's the first and the third. So that's why that is the correct answer. The recency effect is also a serial position effect. The two major types of long-term memory are implicit and explicit. The level of processing that produces the best recall for long-term memory is called semantic processing. All memories are stored in a specific brain area known as the amygdala. Well, that's false. Emotional memories are often easier to recall than factual ones. That's true, and you may recall that those are called flashbulb memories. At a party, you meet a woman named Jenny. You want to remember her name, so you rehearse it and actually learn her name. 6 months later, you meet Jenny for a business meeting. Jenny has changed her name to Susie. Even though you try to remember her new name, you keep calling her Jenny. You're experiencing, and that's called interference. So that's when one memory interferes with another, your ability to accurately recall another memory. And we talked actually in the lecture about two kinds of interference, retroactive and proactive, but I didn't make you discriminate between those. I just did interference in general. In a study by Elizabeth Loftus, participants viewed a video depicting a car accident. In the video, the glass was not broken on either car. Later, participants were asked one of two questions. One group was asked, was there broken glass after the car smashed into each other? The other group was asked, was there broken glass after the cars hit each other? The participants asked the question first were more likely to say yes than those asked the second question, and that was true. Peg's grandmother tells her that when she was a 3-year-old child, she got to perform on stage with a magician. At first, Peg can only vaguely remember the event, but months later, Peg is sure it happened. 2 years later, Peg finds out that it was actually his cousin, Amber, who was at the magic show, and the events never happened to Peg. Peg had a false memory. And this was the last question from the section on memory. Vanessa is watching TV when James asks her a question. Initially, Vanessa asked James to repeat the question. However, before James can do so, Vanessa remembers the question and answers appropriately. Vanessa was able to do so using her sensory, and in this case specifically, echoic memory. So this particular exam had 18 questions on learning, so I'm going to go through those as well. The first one is just the definition. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior caused by practice or experience. Susie is startled when she is watching a scary movie and hears a loud pop. This happens several times. Susie stops being startled. Susie has habituated. Jenny goes to the dentist the first time and is not afraid. The dentist does a bad job or Johnny, I should say, giving him a shot and Johnny cries. This also happens on Johnny's second and third visits to the dentist. The fourth time Johnny goes to the dentist, he starts crying. When Dr. Smith walks into the room, in this example, Dr. Smith starts out as the neutral stimulus and becomes the conditioned stimulus. So in this little scenario, I've just described a textbook example of classical conditioning. And in doing that, I'm going to ask you to recognize the neutral stimulus, conditioned stimulus, unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, and conditioned response. So you actually have the same scenario in the next question, so I'm not going to read that again. Crying after the shot is an unconditioned response. Crying at the side of Dr. Smith is a conditioned response. And there in question 5, once again, the same scenario. The painful shot itself is an unconditioned stimulus. Question 6. So referring back to the same scenario, Dr. Smith gets better at giving shots on Johnny's next visit. 10 visits to the dentist, the shots do not hurt anymore. Eventually, Johnny stops crying when Dr. Smith walks into the room. Johnny has undergone extinction. Dr. Smith gets better at giving shots, so we're still in the same scenario. On Johnny's next 10 visits to the dentist, the shots do not hurt anymore. Eventually, Johnny stops crying when Dr. Smith walks into the room. Oddly, 2 years later, on the next visit to the dentist, Johnny cries when Dr. Smith walks into the room. This is spontaneous recovery. Humans can really learn by classical conditioning, just like Pavlov's dogs. Well, that's true, and hopefully you, even if you didn't know that already, you would have discerned that from the previous set of questions covering classical conditioning, where we have a human learning through that process. Sally goes to a new restaurant and eats sushi for the first time. Unfortunately, Sally had just caught a bad stomach virus and vomits all night. Now, with the thought of sushi, Sally feels like vomiting. Sally has acquired a conditioned taste aversion. Jim teaches 4th grade. He wants his class to perform well on math problems. Jim invents a machine that each student uses to learn math. The machine immediately produces a quarter every time a child answers a math question correctly. For example, Susie sees 2 plus 2 on the screen. When she pushes 4, she receives a quarter. Jim finds that his students do better learning with this machine than without. This is an example of, and that's just a textbook example of operant conditioning. Same scenario in question 11. In this case, I'm asking what is the quarter, and the quarter is a reinforcer. Same scenario in question 12. Answering the question is an operant. It's an operant. Reinforcers always increase the likelihood of behavior there. That's just definitional in nature. Your shoulder hurts, you take a pain pill and it stops hurting. This makes it more likely that you will take a pain pill the next time your shoulder hurts. This example includes negative reinforcement. So we've made a behavior, taking a pain pill, more likely by taking away something, in this case, pain. So since the behavior is more likely, it's reinforcement. Since we took something away, it's negative. Mrs. Simpson yells at Bobby for running around the classroom. Bobby does not stop. In fact, Bobby actually spends more time running around the classroom. In scientific terms, Mrs. Simpson has punished Bobby, and that's false. Punishment makes behavior less likely, and since Bobby's behavior didn't get less likely, no punishment has occurred. Bobby watches a violent cartoon, and the cartoon character uses a spoon to pop off a doll's head. Later that night, Bobby uses a spoon to pop the head off his sister's favorite Barbie doll. This is observational learning. Punishment, this is just a definition, always decreases the likelihood of behavior. And the final question, you're driving down the interstate going 82 miles an hour. When you suddenly see a state trooper hiding in the grass, as you pass, you notice the lights come on. While you would hope that he was after the car in front of you, it turns out that he is really after you. The officer writes you a speeding ticket. For the next several weeks, you do not speed. A speeding ticket was a positive punisher in scientific terms, and the answer to that is true. So you got a speeding ticket. That's the consequence. For some time, you stopped speeding. Okay, so behavior became less likely. And it became less likely because you received something. Something was added, a speeding ticket. So that makes that positive punishment. So I hope that helps. Again, if there are things that you don't understand, maybe you missed a question and you don't know why you missed that question, please get in touch with me. Hopefully I will have addressed them in this feedback here for the exam, but in the event that I didn't address something that you have a question about, please get a hold of me through email or call my office. I want you to be successful in the class and I want you to learn the material.